The sun burned low over the endless wheat fields, its dying glow painting the horizon in streaks of blood red and gold. From a distance, the land looked quiet, almost peaceful, the kind of silence that made outsiders believe this region was safe. But Amina knew better. She had lived her entire life in these fields, plowing earth with her hands, tending crops with quiet patience, listening to the whispers of the soil and the shifting winds. To her neighbors she was nothing more than a simple farmer, a woman too plain and unremarkable to be remembered in the grand stories of war. They pitied her when she walked through the village with her patched clothes and scarred hands, never suspecting that the stillness in her gaze was born not from weakness but from experience. She had been doubted all her life, too quiet, too fragile, too ordinary to matter. Yet that evening, as she crouched low behind the swaying stalks of wheat, the weight of a rifle steady in her grip, she knew the moment had come to prove them wrong. The enemy had arrived, 12 men hardened by conflict, mercenaries with laughter as sharp as broken glass and eyes that had long forgotten mercy. They came not for war but for cruelty, hunting villages like wolves in search of blood, and this time their boots trampled her land. The rumble of engines cut through the quiet. A black truck rolled into the field, followed by 2 motorcycles whose riders let their tires tear the earth she had nurtured. Amina watched them from her hiding place, her breath calm, her heartbeat steady as stone. She counted them carefully, 12 shadows moving with the arrogance of predators. They did not expect resistance. Why would they? This was a woman's field, they thought. An old farmer, harmless and frail, could never lift a hand against them. They laughed as they dismounted, their voices carrying over the stalks like a chorus of jackals, mocking the emptiness of the land and the weakness they believed lived here. Their leader, a tall man with tattoos curling up his neck, shouted orders with the lazy confidence of one who thought victory already his. But in the darkness of the wheat, Amina's hands never trembled. She slid her finger along the trigger of her weapon, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a hunter who had spent her life studying patience. For her, the earth itself whispered tactics, the wind revealed pathways, and the wheat bent just enough to cloak her movement. They thought she was simple. Tonight she would show them how simple can mean deadly. Her memories came in fragments as she steadied her rifle against her shoulder. Years ago, before the war stripped away kindness from the soil, she had learned to hunt rabbits for food, stalking them quietly through the brush until her arrow struck true. It was in those moments that she had discovered her gift, not in the chaos of the village nor the brutality of soldiers, but in the silence between breaths. She had not asked for this gift, nor boasted of it, for the world rarely valued the skills of a farmer's daughter. And so she had hidden it, living quietly while the world dismissed her. But now the gift returned, sharper than ever, as if the years of doubt had only honed her senses. She could hear the mercenaries' boots press against the soil, could smell the oil on their weapons, could even sense the rhythm of their careless laughter. Every detail became a thread she wove into her plan. She had 5 minutes, 5 minutes before they spread too far, 5 minutes before the night swallowed the chance to strike. In 5 minutes she would end them. The first man fell without even knowing death was upon him. Amina's shot cut through the twilight, the silenced crack of her rifle blending with the whispering wind. He dropped instantly, his body swallowed by the wheat before his comrades could notice. She shifted position quickly, her movements as natural as the bending stalks around her. The second shot came before the first scream, a bullet that split the air and buried itself in another man's chest, dropping him like a sack of grain. By the time the others reacted, confusion already clouded their ranks. They shouted into the field, firing blindly, their bullets tearing stalks but finding no target. Amina was already gone from her nest, moving low, fast, never staying in one place. She had learned long ago that survival depended on motion, that to be unseen was more powerful than armor. The third man staggered as her shot tore through his thigh, sending him sprawling into the dirt where the next bullet found his skull. 3 down. The silence of the land was broken now by the chaos of men who believed themselves hunters but had become prey. Their arrogance melted into fear, their confidence into rage, but rage could not see through the wheat. The leader barked orders, his voice sharp with panic disguised as fury. He told his men to spread out, to search, to find the ghost who struck them down. But each command only divided them further, making them easier to pick off. Amina's breathing was calm, her mind a map of movements and angles. She no longer heard their words, she heard only the ticking of her own pulse counting down the 5 minutes she had given herself. 4 men had already fallen before the others even realized how close she was. They were city fighters, trained in streets and alleys, not in the open breath of the fields. The wheat was her ally, the shadows her cover, the earth her partner in the dance of war. She slipped between them as easily as water cuts through stone, her rifle speaking in sharp whispers that silenced screams before they rose. 5 minutes, 12 men. That was the challenge she had set for herself. Not to survive. Not to hide. But to prove, once and for all, that doubt is the greatest weapon she had ever been given, because it blinded her enemies long enough for her to destroy them. The air stank of cordite and fear. Smoke from the mercenaries' wild gunfire hung over the wheat like a low fog, disturbed only by the frantic shouts of men who could not see their enemy. Amina slid through the stalks with a predator's patience, her rifle gripped tight, her ears tuned to the smallest rustle of movement. She had cut down 4, and the others still believed they could trap her, still clung to the lie that a lone woman could not possibly bring them ruin. That arrogance slowed them, made them reckless. One of them charged forward, screaming curses as he sprayed bullets into the night, his weapon rattling like a storm of iron. He never saw the glint of Amina's scope a dozen meters away. One shot, clean and merciless, and his voice ended mid-curse. He toppled into the wheat, his body twitching before stillness claimed him. Fuck. The sound made another man spin around, firing blindly, but his hands shook. Panic made his aim useless. Amina let him waste his magazine before she pressed her rifle against the dirt, adjusted by instinct, and squeezed. The bullet took him through the temple. 6. Half their force was gone in less than 2 minutes. For a heartbeat, the field went silent except for the wind. Then came the shouting, fractured and desperate. The leader's voice broke with anger as he screamed for his men to tighten formation, to stop wasting ammunition. But fear was faster than orders. Amina could hear it in their footsteps, stumbling, uneven, each man convinced death was only a breath behind him. She moved again. Crawling through the soil that had fed her family for generations, every grain of dirt familiar beneath her fingertips. This land was hers and here she was queen. She rose only long enough to aim at a shadow moving clumsily between the stalks. He thought crouching would make him invisible. It only slowed him. Her bullet pierced his throat, and he clawed at his neck as he collapsed without a sound. 7. Another turned to run, breaking away from the group in panic, but running in the open field made him a beacon. Amina adjusted her aim, her eye calm behind the glass of her scope, and fired. His back exploded red as he pitched forward into the earth. The others began screaming her name though none of them knew it, calling her witch, phantom, devil of the fields. To them she was no longer a farmer. She was something else, something they had no word for except fear. The leader tried to rally what remained of his men, 3 figures crouched low with weapons shaking in their hands. He roared at them to keep fighting, to flush her out, to prove themselves worthy of the pay they had taken for this blood raid. But they did not hear courage in his voice, only desperation. Amina waited, crouched low, watching them argue. She could end it now with 3 quick shots, but patience was her weapon. She let them stew in terror, let their arguments rise into chaos. The leader shoved one of them forward, calling him a coward. The man resisted, spitting curses back. In that moment of distraction, Amina shifted position and fired. The bullet struck the one who had been shoved, tearing through his chest. 9. The others whirled in panic, one firing wildly, the other diving into the wheat. Their leader cursed again, but Amina did not give him time to steady them. She moved fast, sliding to a new nest, her rifle ready. The man who had fired blindly kept shouting, trying to summon courage from his voice, but his fear betrayed him. His silhouette was clear in the faint glow of the truck headlights still burning in the distance. Amina exhaled, squeezed, and ended his noise. 10. 2 left. By now the leader knew he was fighting death itself. His tattoos, once symbols of menace, meant nothing here. He gritted his teeth, dragging his last man close, whispering fast commands like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. They thought she was circling, but Amina was already closer than they imagined. She crept toward them, her breath steady, her heartbeat a drum counting down the last moments of their arrogance. She could smell their sweat carried by the wind, hear the ragged fear in their breathing. For a brief moment she let herself remember the years of mockery, the voices that called her small, plain, useless. All those words were fuel now, burning quietly in her chest. She rose from the wheat, her rifle already aligned. The younger of the 2 mercenaries spotted her, his mouth opening in shock. He never had time to shout. The bullet struck between his eyes. 11. The leader spun, his weapon jerking up, his face twisted in fury and disbelief. His shots cracked through the air, shredding stalks around her, but Amina was already rolling aside, her movements fluid and sharp. She came up on one knee, her rifle trained steady as a hawk. Her shot thundered into his chest, staggering him back. He fired again, screaming, refusing to fall. She stepped forward, calm, deliberate, and placed the final bullet through his heart. Whoa! Silence swallowed the field. For 5 long minutes, the land had burned with gunfire and death. Now it was quiet again, the wheat swaying gently as if nothing had happened. Smoke curled upward from the still truck. The bodies of 12 men lay scattered among the stalks, their blood seeping into the soil they had come to defile. Amina stood tall, her rifle heavy in her hands, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She had done it. 12 enemies in 5 minutes, each one doubting her until the very second death claimed them. The wind brushed against her face like a blessing, carrying away the last echoes of violence. She looked down at her scarred hands, once tools of farming, now instruments of war. They had doubted her, called her nothing. But tonight, in the heart of her field, she had become everything they feared. The silence after the storm was heavier than the gunfire itself. The field, once bright under the setting sun, now seemed to breathe with the echoes of violence. Amina stood still, her rifle pressed to her chest, her eyes sweeping the horizon for signs of movement. She knew better than to trust silence. Silence could mean survival, but it could also mean danger gathering in the dark. Her instincts whispered caution. 12 men were dead, their blood soaking the soil, but men like these rarely moved alone. Mercenaries traveled in packs, and where one group fell, another often followed. She crouched again, reloading her weapon with steady hands, her body moving as if on rhythm with the earth itself. The empty magazines clinked softly as she tucked them aside, her breath slow and measured. For years she had been overlooked, her strength hidden beneath the mask of simplicity. But now, under the dim glow of the moon climbing above the fields, she felt no need to hide. She was exposed, yes, but she was unafraid. The land belonged to her. The darkness was her ally. If more came, she would welcome them the same way she had welcomed the first 12, with bullets and silence. The smell of blood carried far, and with it came the faint vibration of engines once more. Amina closed her eyes, listening, separating the sound from the breath of the wind. Yes, another truck. Maybe 2. Their rumble grew louder, heavier, shaking the earth with promise of vengeance. The surviving raiders must have called for backup before they died, or perhaps another squad had been nearby, drawn to the gunfire like vultures to carrion. Amina did not flinch. She dragged the bodies of 2 fallen mercenaries into the high wheat, hiding them just enough to bait the newcomers. She had learned long ago that fear multiplied when men stumbled upon the corpses of those they trusted. The wheat whispered around her as she slipped into the darkness, her shadow vanishing beneath the swaying stalks. She lay flat on her stomach, her rifle tucked close, her cheek against the soil. Her heart slowed, her mind sharpened, every sense stretching outward to catch the smallest clue of her enemy's arrival. The land grew restless as the headlights finally cut across the horizon, beams slicing through the stalks like knives of light. 2 trucks rolled into the field, larger than the first, carrying more men. Amina narrowed her eyes. She counted at least 10 silhouettes, maybe more. The odds did not matter. She had already proven what a simple woman could do. She would prove it again. The trucks halted where the bodies of the first mercenaries lay sprawled. The men spilled out, weapons raised, their shouts tearing through the night. One of them stumbled immediately upon the corpse of the leader, his chest torn by her bullet. The sight made him freeze. "Ambush!" he screamed, his voice shaking. The others whipped their heads around, guns snapping up, eyes scanning the wheat. Their nerves were already breaking, and Amina had not yet fired a shot. She waited, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, her breathing shallow and quiet. She wanted their fear to grow, to rot them from the inside before her bullets cut them down. They began spreading out, forming a loose circle, their leader barking orders with a trembling voice. Amina picked her first target, a man lagging at the edge, his posture slouched, his attention fixed on the ground instead of the shadows. She squeezed. The silenced crack of her rifle ended him instantly, his body folding into the soil without ceremony. Panic rippled through the others, voices overlapping, boots thundering across the earth as they searched for a phantom they could not see. Amina slid backward into deeper shadow, her body invisible in the endless stalks. She reloaded quickly, her movements as fluid as breath. She was not hunting now, she was teaching them fear. The mercenaries fired into the wheat again, their bullets ripping stalks into confetti, the flashes of their muzzles lighting terrified faces. But the field was endless, and their firepower wasted itself against emptiness. Amina crept low, circling, her mind calculating angles and distance with the precision of instinct. She stopped behind a patch of soil elevated just enough to give her scope a clear line. Another man exposed himself near the trucks, shouting for reinforcements. Her shot struck him in the back, cutting his words short. 2 down. The leader barked louder, his desperation cracking his voice, but Amina heard the lie in his tone. He was afraid. They all were. She shifted again, fast and unseen, her body moving like part of the wind. Another mercenary passed close, too close, his rifle sweeping back and forth. He muttered under his breath, fear thick in his words. Amina rose just enough behind him, her knife flashing in the dim moonlight. She slit his throat silently, lowering him into the soil as if tucking him into a grave. 3. She wiped her blade on the earth, her eyes already searching for the next shadow. These men had come for blood. She would give them theirs. The field became a storm of confusion. The mercenaries shouted into radios, cursing, calling her a ghost, swearing revenge. Some fired randomly, others huddled together, too afraid to separate. Amina moved between them, unseen, her body flowing through the wheat as if she belonged to the land itself. She took her fourth with another rifle shot, the bullet punching through his shoulder and dropping him before he could scream. She waited for his partner to run to him, then struck the rescuer with her blade, her hand clamping over his mouth until he stopped struggling. By now, the survivors were unraveling completely. The truck's headlights painted harsh shadows across the field, but shadows were her shield. She crept closer, her boots silent, her breath steady. She watched the leader's face twist between fury and terror, his tattoos glistening with sweat. He tried to rally his men, swore he would pay them double if they stood firm, but loyalty dissolved in the face of unseen death. They had expected a farmer. They had found a nightmare. One by one they would join their comrades in the soil. The moon climbed higher, pale and merciless, casting silver light across the broken field. The corpses of the first 12 mercenaries still lay scattered in silence, and now the second wave of intruders had begun to crumble. Their boots tore at the wheat, their frantic shouts rising like the cries of animals in a slaughterhouse. Amina moved like a shadow among them, a hunter without fear, her rifle strapped tight across her chest as she gripped the knife slick with fresh blood. She had ended 5 of them already, leaving 7 still stumbling through the night, though their courage had withered into ash. They had expected a weak woman, a farmer, a simple soul who would kneel in terror when faced with their weapons. Instead they found themselves stalked by something they could not name. Amina had no need for words. The earth spoke for her, the wind carried her message, doubt me and you will die. She circled the trucks, her eyes narrowing as she studied the men left alive. The leader was still shouting, veins bulging at his neck, trying to hold his fractured squad together. 2 clung close to him, their rifles sweeping the darkness with trembling hands. The rest scattered, some too far to hear his orders. They were broken, divided, ripe for her to dismantle piece by piece. Amina crouched low, her body pressed flat to the soil, her breathing steady. She remembered her father's voice long ago, teaching her that patience could break stronger foes than anger ever could. A storm rages and destroys, he had said, but the patient river carves mountains into dust. She smiled faintly, a ghost of memory flickering through her heart. Tonight she was both storm and river. She slid forward, her knife ready, eyes fixed on one of the stragglers too close to the wheat's edge. He stood nervously, muttering into his radio, his back exposed. She rose from the stalks, swift and silent, clamping her hand over his mouth before he could shout. The knife slid deep, hot blood spilling across her fingers. She dragged him into the wheat, his body swallowed by the stalks before his comrades even noticed. 6. The mercenaries fired into the dark again, startled by the faint rustle of movement they thought they heard. Bullets cracked across the field, lighting the wheat with sparks, but Amina had already vanished deeper. She used their fear against them, letting their panic waste their strength. They shouted curses, calling her witch, ghost, demon. To them, it was easier to believe in a monster than to admit that a simple woman had turned their numbers into nothing. She spotted another figure retreating toward the trucks, stumbling over a body. He bent low, shaking the corpse as if hoping it was still alive. The desperation in his movements made him clumsy. Amina steadied her rifle, the silencer a whisper of death in the night. One shot through his chest and he collapsed on top of his fallen comrade. 7. The others saw the muzzle flash and turned their weapons toward her, unleashing a hail of bullets. She ducked low, rolling behind the curve of earth, stalks snapping over her back. The soil shook under their gunfire, but not a single bullet touched her. When their magazines clicked empty, the night swallowed their courage whole. Amina rose again, sliding into another angle. She watched the leader screaming orders, his words sharp, his fury boiling, but his men no longer listened. Their eyes darted, their steps faltered, each one convinced they were next. She had reduced them from soldiers to frightened animals, and frightened animals make mistakes. One stumbled into the open, too desperate to hide, his rifle clutched against his chest as though it could shield him. Amina waited for him to run, let his terror carry him far from the others, then fired. The bullet tore through his back. His scream echoed, breaking the fragile control the leader had left. The others broke into chaos, two scattering to the far edge of the field while the remaining clung desperately to him. They fired again, their muzzles lighting the night, but the sound was weaker now, their aim broken by trembling hands. Amina crawled closer, her knife back in her palm, the wheat whispering as it bent to her body. She rose behind one of the clustered men, her blade slicing across his throat before he could turn. His gurgled cry drowned beneath the gunfire of his comrades. 9. The leader spun, catching sight of her shadow retreating into the stalks. He fired, his bullets carving empty space, his voice raw with hatred. "Show yourself, coward!" he roared, spitting into the night. But Amina did not answer. She let him rage, let his fury blind him. The last two of his men were losing themselves, one sobbing as he clutched his rifle, the other trying to crawl beneath the truck for safety. Amina targeted the one beneath the vehicle. Her bullet struck the dirt first, ricocheting into his leg, pinning him with a scream. As his body twisted, exposed, she fired again, ending him swiftly. 10. The sobbing soldier turned his weapon uselessly, his hands shaking so hard the barrel rattled. Amina walked toward him slowly, her steps deliberate, each one a drumbeat of inevitability. He fired in panic, bullets zipping past her, missing by miles. She didn't bother hiding. She raised her rifle and shot him cleanly through the skull. 11. Only the leader remained. The man looked around at the field, at the corpses of his men sprawled across the soil, their blood seeping into the land. His rage collapsed into terror, his chest heaving as his eyes darted in every direction. He had thought himself invincible, thought his tattoos and his cruelty made him a predator. Now he saw the truth, he had been prey all along. Amina stepped into the open, her rifle aimed steady, her shadow long in the moonlight. For a moment their eyes locked. He saw not a farmer, not a weak woman, but the executioner who had destroyed his pack in silence. His hands shook as he raised his weapon, but Amina fired first. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him to the dirt. He tried to crawl, spitting curses, clawing at the soil as though it could save him. She walked closer, her boots slow, her breathing calm. He turned, his face twisted in hatred and fear. Amina stood over him, her rifle steady. "This is my land," she whispered, her voice low, final. Then she pulled the trigger. Whoa. The field was hers again. The night carried the smell of iron, heavy and unrelenting. Bodies lay sprawled across the soil like broken scarecrows, their blood darkening the wheat. The field was no longer quiet, it was sacred, marked by a woman's defiance and the echo of her bullets. Amina stood in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling with calm steadiness. 2 waves had come, 22 men in total, and not a single one had left alive. Yet she did not lower her guard. The moon was still high, and the wind still whispered of more danger. These men were not the kind to accept defeat. Someone would come looking for them. Someone always did. Amina knelt beside the fallen leader, his tattoos smeared with blood, his eyes wide and empty. She stripped the ammunition from his vest, reloading with ruthless efficiency. Every bullet mattered now. Every second mattered. She had survived because she treated time like a weapon, and she was not about to waste it. She rose again, scanning the horizon. Her ears caught something, the faint thrum of engines in the distance, deeper than the trucks that had come before. This was heavier, slower, carrying more weight. Armored vehicles. Her stomach tightened, but she did not flinch. If they brought armor, it meant they feared her now. They would come prepared, expecting a fight, expecting resistance greater than a single farmer. They could not accept the truth, that one woman had brought ruin upon their men. She moved quickly, dragging crates of tools from the shed at the edge of the field. It was not much, just farming equipment, wires, fuel cans and rusted iron, but she had learned long ago that anything could become a weapon in the right hands. She lined the path leading into the field with sharp metal spikes torn from the plow, pouring oil over the earth until it gleamed in the moonlight. She worked silently, methodically, each movement born of instinct rather than thought. The land was hers and she would shape it into a trap. Let them come. Let them bring their machines. She would show them that no steel was stronger than the resolve of the soil. The rumble grew louder. Amina crouched low, her rifle slung across her shoulder as she pressed her ear to the ground. Yes, 2 armored trucks, rolling heavy, the sound of mounted guns rattling faintly above the engines. She retreated deeper into the wheat, her eyes never leaving the path. When the first truck appeared, its headlights cut through the night like fire. It roared forward, tires grinding against the soil, but the moment they hit the oil, the wheels slipped, spinning violently. The vehicle lurched sideways, crashing into the spikes. Tires exploded, steel shrieked, and the truck toppled onto its side with a thunderous crash. The men inside screamed, their bodies thrown against the metal cage. Amina fired into the chaos, her bullets finding the men who staggered from the wreckage. 3 fell before they could even lift their weapons. The second truck braked hard, its engine growling as it swerved to avoid the trap. Its gunner opened fire, spraying the wheat with heavy rounds, stalks bursting into pieces as the soil erupted around her. Amina dropped flat, the roar of bullets deafening. But she did not panic. She crawled, fast and silent, circling wide until she reached the truck's blind spot. Her hands moved quickly, pulling a fuel canister from her satchel, dousing the earth in liquid fire. She struck a match and tossed it. Flames roared to life, engulfing the rear of the vehicle. Men shouted, leaping from the back as the heat spread. She picked them off one by one, her rifle cracking softly, until the fire claimed the rest. Smoke coiled upward, thick and black, staining the moonlight. Amina crouched, her face glowing orange in the flames, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She had destroyed their armored convoy with nothing more than oil, iron, and fire. 5 more men lay dead in the dirt, their screams still echoing faintly in the burning wreckage. She reloaded calmly, her movements precise, her hands steady even as the heat licked the edges of the field. But there was no time to celebrate. She knew there would be more. Her enemies were not fools. Each wave they sent was stronger, more prepared, more desperate to break the ghost that haunted this land. She looked around at the bodies, the broken trucks, the flames dancing against the wheat, and she felt no fear. Instead she felt clarity. Every enemy that came was another reminder of why she fought, not for glory, not for revenge, but for survival, for the land, for the people who had doubted her all her life. They thought she was nothing. Tonight she was everything. The fire spread quickly, licking up the wheat in orange waves. Amina moved fast, retreating deeper into the field, away from the heat. She needed new ground, higher ground. She climbed the slope that rose at the northern edge of her land, a ridge she had walked countless times in her farming days. From the top, she could see the whole field below, glowing with fire, littered with corpses, broken trucks, and shattered steel. Smoke twisted upward into the night like a signal, a beacon that would draw more foes. She did not smile, but her eyes hardened. Let them come. Let them see what she had done here. Doubt had been her cloak all her life, but now doubt was her weapon. Every man who stepped onto her land carried it in his heart, and she would use it to end them. She crouched low at the ridge, her rifle balanced across her knee, her silhouette framed by the burning field. She was no longer a farmer. She was the reaper of this land, and her harvest was death. The dust had not yet settled when Maria crouched low against a broken concrete wall, her breath steady despite the ache that crept into her muscles. She counted silently, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow as though she could feel the movements of her enemies without needing to see them. 6 had fallen. 6 more remained. The air was charged with tension, a sharp electricity that clung to her skin as the night deepened around the ruined field. The moon cast pale light over the wreckage of vehicles, shattered crates, and discarded weapons. Somewhere in that darkness, 6 men prepared themselves to eliminate her. They thought they were the hunters now, circling the wounded prey. What they didn't understand was that Maria was never prey. She was the storm that crept in silence before it tore the earth apart. She adjusted the grip on her knife, blade wet with the memory of the last life it had claimed. Every sound mattered, the crunch of boots on gravel, the click of a rifle's safety, even the nervous cough of a man trying to steady his breath. She tracked them like a predator reading the signs of the forest. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of smoke and gun oil. She knew where 2 of them had moved, trying to flank her from the west side of the barn. She slid from cover, silent as a shadow, the soles of her boots pressing against broken ground without sound. Her body ached, her hand bled from a graze she'd taken earlier, but her spirit was sharp, focused, relentless. The first man never saw her. He raised his rifle slowly, aiming at the spot where he thought she might be hiding, but by then Maria was already behind him. Her knife pierced cleanly beneath his rib cage, angled upward to silence him before his body hit the ground. She caught him, lowered him gently, then snatched the rifle from his slack hands. The other flanker turned at the faint scuff of movement, but Maria squeezed the trigger once. The sound cracked like thunder in the night, the bullet striking his chest and sending him sprawling into the dirt. She moved before his body landed, rolling back into cover as three others opened fire from different directions. Bullets ripped into the barn, spraying splinters and dust into the air. Maria's heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. The chaos was hers to command. She could almost see the battlefield from above, every man's position revealed in the rhythm of their fire. She darted sideways, cutting low through the wreckage of a burned-out vehicle, the rifle still in her hands. Her eyes caught movement. One man was reloading, his magazine clattering as he fumbled. She didn't hesitate. She raised the weapon and fired, her shot precise, cutting him down before his hands could lock the magazine in place. His scream was short, muffled by the dust. The survivors were shaken now. 5 minutes earlier they had believed they would crush her easily. Now they had lost 9 men, and Maria stood unbroken among them, her body moving with the calm certainty of someone who had accepted death long ago and decided to walk past it. They began shouting to one another, voices breaking, desperation leaking into their words. She heard one yell, "Fall back. She's not human." Another cursed loudly, firing blindly into the shadows. She used their panic like a weapon, slipping between the bursts of fire, appearing where they least expected. A sudden flash lit the field. One of them had thrown a grenade, panicked and careless. Maria dropped behind a steel beam, shielding her body as the explosion ripped the ground open, sending dirt and shrapnel raining through the air. The blast shook her bones, but she rose again instantly, eyes narrowing through the smoke. The man who had thrown it was exposed, stepping forward to see if he had finished the job. Maria leveled her rifle and fired 2 clean shots into his chest, watching him crumple. 4 remained. She ducked low, discarded the rifle and drew her pistol. Her bullets were few but every one mattered. She pushed forward aggressively now, no longer evading but cutting straight through their lines. One rushed her from the side with a knife, screaming with fear more than fury. Maria pivoted smoothly, catching his wrist and driving her elbow into his jaw. His knife dropped, and in the same movement she seized it and drove it back into his throat. She pulled free, shoving his body aside, and spun to fire a shot at the man who had been covering him. The bullet struck his leg, and as he collapsed screaming, Maria silenced him with another round to the head. The last 2 realized the truth too late. This was never a fight they could win. They broke into a run, stumbling over the wreckage, desperate to escape the nightmare they had unleashed upon themselves. Maria gave chase, her body a blur against the moonlit field. She sprinted low, cutting across their path, closing the distance with inhuman precision. One turned his weapon back, trying to fire wildly as he ran, but Maria dropped into a roll, came up steady and fired her pistol once. The shot cracked through the night, striking him clean in the back. He stumbled forward, collapsed face first into the dirt and did not rise again. The final man screamed, dropping his weapon entirely, trying to flee into the trees. Maria's steps echoed behind him, relentless, inevitable. She didn't waste a bullet on him. Instead, she leapt forward, dragging him down into the mud. He cried out, clawing at the earth as she pressed him down, her knife flashing once in the moonlight before silence fell. She rose slowly, the last breath of her final enemy fading into the cold night air. Her chest heaved, sweat dripping down her brow, but her eyes were calm, unshaken. 5 minutes had passed since the first shot. 12 men lay scattered across the field, their weapons silent, their voices gone forever. Maria stood alone among them, her body battered but unbroken, her spirit radiating a quiet, lethal certainty. She did not smile, she did not weep, she simply walked forward, vanishing into the smoke and dust as if she had never been there at all. The battlefield was no longer just a place of death, it had become a living memory etched into the soil. Smoke lingered like heavy ghosts, hovering low across the scorched fields where flames still danced faintly in blackened stalks of wheat. Clara moved silently through it all, her boots crunching on debris, her rifle steady at her shoulder, her mind sharpened like the blade she carried at her hip. She had eliminated 12 enemies in 5 minutes earlier, but the weight of that act clung to her, not as guilt but as responsibility. She was no longer just a farmer's daughter with dirt under her nails and sunburn on her skin. She was now a weapon, honed by necessity, carrying the echoes of everyone who doubted her. And she was not finished. Somewhere beyond the haze, more enemies regrouped, their voices cutting faintly through the moans of the dying. Clara adjusted her stance, squinting against the drifting smoke, and began to move closer, her body aligning with the rhythm of survival that had carried her this far. As she advanced, she noticed how eerily quiet the survivors around her had become. Fellow villagers who had fought alongside,